Macron's words sparked a flame that now devours the streets of Paris. Under the gray sky of the capital, an echo of rebellion grows among fluttering flags and shattered symbols. The voice of a people silenced for years now resonates in chants that pierce the walls of power. What line did the leader cross when he played with foreign fire? Now, the shadows of discord rise, and every cry is a challenge to the imposed destiny. The city burns in a deafening silence, torn portraits, raised hands, a chorus of voices demanding answers amid whispers of failed strategies and crumbling pacts. The crowd moves forward like an unstoppable tide. How far will this showdown between the palace and the squares go? The truth hides behind curtains of smoke, but one thing is clear. Someone underestimated the power of those who refuse to be pawns in another's game. The outcome, written in flames, is about to unfold. The streets of Paris are filled with tricolor flags. Amid muffled cries, protesters chant, "We are not soldiers for anyone." Macron, with a steely gaze, insists on mobilizing troops, but the French people raise their voices. Dying for foreign interests? Question the signs. Le Patriot leads the protest, and their message is clear. France will not pay in blood. The president's words, spoken on March 2nd, now echo dangerously. "Guarantee peace with armies," he declared. The irony does not go unnoticed. Macron defends his stance. The ceasefire is fragile. His speech, filled with arrogance, clashes with reality. Ukraine retreats in Kursk. Russia advances. From Washington, Trump smiles. His rapprochement with Moscow threatens the geopolitical board. Meanwhile, NATO wavers. Trump threatens to withdraw funds, leaving Europe in uncertainty. Let France pay, Macron suggests. Torn between two fronts, he seems to be losing his footing. Protests grow. In London, Downing Street supports Kiev. Germany hesitates. The EU is cautious, avoiding commitments. Paris, however, insists on sending troops for peace. But what peace is built with weapons? The demonstrators are not deceived. Macron wants fire, we want ashes, shouts a young woman, her face illuminated by torches. Social media explodes. Hashtag Macron resign trends worldwide. The pressure is unstoppable. Meanwhile, Moscow watches. Putin remains silent, but his silence speaks volumes. Trump, at a rally, praises his pragmatic diplomacy. A divided Europe wonders, who will win this game? The Kremlin sticks to its plan while Kiev's allies fight among themselves. In contrast, Parisian protesters do not back down. An elderly man lifts a torn portrait of the president, traitor. The police hold their ground, but the human tide advances. The Seine remains a silent witness. The French president had recently threatened Russia in one of his last public statements. Macron suggested that Europe should prepare to use nuclear weapons against Moscow. His words were condemned worldwide. Not even the UK had dared to threaten Russia in such a way. The Kremlin's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, responded categorically, calling the French leader's remarks extremely dangerous. What is happening in Ukraine clearly demonstrates that NATO has no chance of defeating the Kremlin in a conventional war, he stated. This is why Macron, in his desperation, is resorting to nuclear threats. The use of such weapons would be absolutely devastating for Europe. Any leader in their right mind knows exactly what the consequences would be, Lavrov continued. Macron's words are utterly senseless. It is no coincidence that Trump is playing the NATO card, calling it an obsolete organization. His European allies frown. Macron, now isolated, faces a dilemma: yield or defy the people. The protests in France are just the beginning of a rising wave against Brussels' actions. 3 years of conflict in Ukraine have proven the Atlantic bloc to be ineffective. Europeans do not feel any safer, nor has their quality of life improved. Quite the opposite. Energy shortages have become a daily reality in the European Union, and rising utility bills hit Europeans' wallets hard. This particularly affects the industry of the old continent. Germany, once known as Europe's industrial powerhouse, has reduced production due to soaring energy costs. The protests in France against sending troops to Ukraine are not just about a moral opposition to military force. They reflect a growing belief that NATO and its allied countries do not serve the interests of ordinary people. In this scenario, Trump's idea of distancing himself from NATO is far from irrational. He knows that the Atlantic Alliance is a financial black hole, a bottomless pit that cannot sustain itself without victorious wars. And Ukraine is another defeat. That's why the Republican is trying to recoup his investment by securing Ukrainian resources, rare earth minerals and wheat in particular. A negotiation that Zelensky initially rejected, but after public humiliation in Washington, now reluctantly accepts. The European Union's position on Ukraine is increasingly complicated. More and more member states doubt that their financial aid has had any positive effect. Many openly resist labeling Russia as a threat, refusing to follow Brussels' narrative. The situation has become evident in Romania, where the latest election results were annulled under EU pressure. The winning candidate, Călin Georgescu, was in favor of re-establishing relations with Russia and opposed the Ukraine war. Previously, leaders like Viktor Orban of Hungary or Alexander Vučić of Serbia had already expressed similar sentiments. With the European Union divided, Macron's words seem utterly reckless. No wonder the French are protesting. Everything indicates that these demonstrations will spread as European leaders continue pushing their narrative. The people are starting to ask, will these leaders go to fight themselves? Will they send their own children before asking their citizens to do so? The protests in France highlight a growing discontent among European citizens regarding their government's foreign policies and military interventions. Macron's statements have ignited a fire that now spreads across the streets of Paris, symbolizing a broader resistance against decisions perceived as detached from the interests of the people. The discontent is not just about sending troops to Ukraine. It reflects deeper frustrations over economic instability, energy shortages, and the widening gap between political elites and the public. The European Union, once seen as a pillar of unity and security, now faces internal divisions that threaten its stability. Meanwhile, global powers like the US and Russia maneuver strategically, each seeking to strengthen their geopolitical positions. As protests grow and political tensions escalate, one thing is clear: the people refuse to be mere pawns in a high-stakes game of power. How far will these protests go? Will European leaders continue pushing policies that seem to serve foreign interests over their own citizens? The coming weeks will be decisive. If you want to stay informed about the unfolding crisis and the future of Europe, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Your voice matters, and staying aware is the first step toward making a difference.